The Okefenokee is just very simply put a special, important place. This is an area that I recreated in long before I became a Southeast representative with Defenders. So it's very near and dear to me in both a personal and professional capacity. And for those of you that have been to this place, um, you left having probably a profound appreciation for public lands and the nature of this superlative wetland. And it is so important just because of, next slide, please, its size. The Okefenokee is 438,000 acres, and it's been designated, among other things, by the United Nations as a wetland of international importance. And that is primarily because this is a wetland that's unique in that it's intact. Throughout the Southeast, we once had wetlands of significant size, but many of them, the majority, I would argue, have been compromised in some way, whether through agriculture, development, or just the paving over for any type of industrial use. And the Okefenokee is unique in the sense that it still essentially exists and functions as it has for millennia. And for that reason, it provides exceptional wildlife habitat, and it is the largest wildlife refuge east of the Mississippi. And no doubt, if you've been to the Okefenokee, you've encountered American alligators. There are anywhere from 12 to 15,000 of these beautiful creatures throughout the refuge. Alligators are often called swamp canaries because their presence is typically indicative of whether a wetland is healthy or not. And the fact that there are so many alligators in the Okefenokee, of course, reinforces the fact that this is a healthy place still. Now, with that said, we tend to think of swamps as, dark, dank, humid places. But the fact is that the Okefenokee has a lot of land too. It has a lot of pine islands like this. It has cypress forests. And in those areas, it's filled with terrestrial animals like black bears, the Florida black bear, gopher tortoise, eastern indigo snakes. But then, throughout the refuge, just as a water-based wilderness, you have black water channels, you've got lily ponds, you've got large lakes. And in those areas, you'll find wading birds, such as the wood stork, sandhill cranes, and others. Now, that said, as important as the Okefenokee is to wildlife, it's also important to people, and it does provide just an unparalleled wilderness experience here on the East Coast. I've had the blessing of visiting a lot of our iconic wilderness areas in this country, both out east and out west, and I can unequivocally say that the Okefenokee is unlike any other. If you're brave enough, if you desire for a sense of adventure, you can paddle along these black water channels and get into the heart of this wilderness area. And you can actually get 7 miles from a road, which is very significant for the East Coast. For perspective, the most remote spot in the lower 48 is in Yellowstone, and it's 21 miles from a road. So here with the Okefenokee, we just have this superlative wilderness area and wildlife core that must be protected. And that's why we're fighting so hard for this place. But it also is notably the headwaters to 2 major river systems in the Southeast, one being the Suwannee and one being the St. Mary's, pictured here, which also in their own right provide really important recreational opportunities and wildlife habitat, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But, in order to really understand the Okefenokee and the challenges we're dealing with today, you've got to zoom out. And I think this map, which has been provided by the Southern Environmental Law Center, one of our key partners here, provides a good overview. because as you can see from that vast green space, that's most of the swamp in the refuge. However, you'll notice along the eastern edge of the refuge, running north to south, there is a brown sliver of land. It's not a very dark brown, but you'll see that it runs the length of this image north to south, and that's called the Trail Ridge. This is a really important component of the Okefenokee, and it's also, ground zero for titanium mining battles today. But the Trail Ridge is, as the name implies, a sliver of land that rises above the swamp. And it's actually an ancient sand dune left behind from when the ocean was further inland. But it provides a really important hydrological support role for the swamp in that it ensures that water is stored within and flows toward the swamp. And on the next slide, you'll see that because of this, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has characterized the Trail Ridge as a geomorphological dam of sorts. And, for those of you that are well-versed in geohydrology, this is, of course, a very significant oversimplification. But an analogy I like to use is that the Trail Ridge is sort of like a parfait, in that it's arranged in very distinct layers. You have consolidated sands, you have clays, you have quartz. And when precipitation hits these layers, it captures it, it slows it down, and it pushes it towards the swamp. And the fear is that should, this parfait of sorts, should the Trail Ridge be blended together or destroyed through something such as mining operations, the Okefenokee will lose its ability to sustain itself. The Trail Ridge also has the added distinction of being rich in titanium mineral concentrates, which is, of course, why we're here today, why this has continued to be an ongoing challenge. And as I mentioned, there is past precedent to this issue. And it all began in the 1990s when the DuPont Corporation tried to mine a vast swath of land along the Trail Ridge next to the refuge. That project, it just engendered massive national opposition and resistance, so much so that then Secretary of the Interior, Bruce Babbitt, actually with the support of our CEO, Jamie Clark, who was director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at that time, came down to the refuge. He publicly denounced the project. And to DuPont's credit, they eventually did abandon the project and they donated a lot of the land. And the really important thing to note from this time is that everyone thought a precedent was created for the future. No one thought that any company would again have the audacity to try to mine this area. But unfortunately, next slide, please, Twin Pines Minerals has failed to heed this lesson. And Ben, if you click on the slide a few times, you'll see the acreages and the land we're talking about here. But you guys will notice that those blue lines are roughly pointing to more or less where DuPont was hoping to mine years ago. But now you'll see Twin Pines Minerals is looking to mine on a tract just south of that. Here's a pretty good overview of what these tracts look like. Again, a map provided by SCLC. And Twin Pines Minerals is an Alabama-based company, and they first came onto the scene when they submitted their permit application in 2019. It was for the first phase of what would have become a roughly 12,000 acre industrial mining complex, the operations of which were expected in time to come within about 400 feet of the swamp itself. Now, on this map, you'll notice along the western area of that project boundary is a tract called TIAA tract. That land is owned by the financial giant TIAA. They have since renounced this project, and they've told Twin Pines that they're not going to allow them to mine on their land. So the project area has shrunk to a degree, but Twin Pines is larger intent to mine about 8,000 acres over the course of several decades, pretty much remains the same here. Now, though some of the details have changed over the past year and a half or so, many of the dangers have really not. They remain the same. At worst, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has repeatedly warned that these titanium mining operations could catastrophically lower the water table in the swamp, among other dangers, and compromise the entirety of this 438,000 acre ecosystem. And if the water table within the swamp is lowered, that would impact in a big way the habitat for these wading birds, for alligators, for fish. It would also expose the swamp to massive fires. And history suggests that once damage of that nature is done to a wetland, you can't get it back. We have spent billions of dollars on restoring the Everglades, which suffered significant hydrological damage over the past century. And still today, that ecosystem only shelters a mere fraction of the wading bird life it once did. On the other hand, under the best case scenario, mining would still destroy important wildlife habitat right on the edge of this unparalleled refuge. It's very likely that these industrial mining operations would occur throughout the night, requiring lighting that would obscure the night skies for which the refuge is renowned. And for those of you that have been to this place and have enjoyed its wilderness, simply knowing that this industrial mining complex would be situated on the doorstep of this wilderness area would dampen that experience for visitors. Now, with all that said, I think pictures speak louder than words. And Ben, take us to the next slide. You'll see that Twin Pines has set up its staging area. And this is what it looks like. You'll see the bones of its dragline equipment in the center of the image there. But on the next slide, you'll see what titanium mining actually looks like. This is a photo from Twin Pines' former operation in Stark, Florida, which is just south of the Okefenokee. And you'll notice that it kind of looks like the land has just been flipped upside down and stripped of all vegetation, because that is in essence what has happened. In order to mine for these titanium mineral concentrates, you have to dig to depths of 50 to 100 feet. And during that process, these miners remove all the land, they blend all the soils together, and then they dump it back into pits. So it's a highly impactful process. And this is, again, just another photo of Twin Pines' operations. But if you go to the next slide, Ben, folks will see what this ultimately looks like in the long run. It looks like a moonscape, in essence, devoid of wildlife, devoid of vegetation. And, for their part, the mining industry will promise to reclaim the land, to attempt to restore it to its natural contours. But the fact is that once the damage is done, you're never going to get back the land to a state that it once was. And I think this photo of the Stark operation is telling and reinforces that fact. So with that said, one of the big questions I get throughout this process is what will these titanium minerals be used for? Because in public communications, Twin Pines has suggested that titanium minerals are used in the development of surgical tools, prosthetics, and even rocket ships. And while that is technically true, 93 of the world's titanium mineral concentrates are refined into titanium dioxide, which is most often used to develop household paint pigments, the white coloring in toothpaste, Oreos, that sort of thing. And with the trail ridge composed of a very specific type of mineral, primarily ilmenite, it's highly likely that what would be mined here would be used ultimately to develop household paint pigment. And with that in mind, I think it's also worth noting that for any company, if they're looking to mine next to a world-class resource, their track record has to speak for itself to some degree. That has to be part of the consideration. And Twin Pines, though they are a young company, they have a history of non-compliance. At that Stark mine, for instance, they were recently cited by the state of Florida for not maintaining basic safety practices, for discharging mining waste into a wetland, among other things. And should, those similar impacts or even more catastrophic impacts be realized next to the swamp, the cost to wildlife would really be immense. But before we talk about those implications, I believe Ben has another trivia question.
Indeed, I do. Thank you, Christian. Okay, folks. So take a quick look at this photo, this series of photos. And the next question is for our bird lovers out there. There are over 200 species of birds that use Okefenokee for habitat, and a number of them are imperiled. So have a take a look at the picture of the birds here in the upper left corner and see if you can identify them. And I'm going to launch the poll. And let's see where the next question is. Polling number 2. Okay, we're going to launch this poll and see what you guys think about those birds in the upper left, which species you think they are. And we'll give folks about 20 seconds to weigh in here. Okay, looks like most folks have weighed in. I'm going to end the polling, share the results, and for those of you who guessed or knew that they are wood storks, you are absolutely correct. Those are wood storks pictured there. A very interesting species of bird. One of the really interesting things about wood storks, and this is one of the things we fear most about the impacts of this mining, is how it will affect levels in the water table. We see this a lot, particularly in Florida, which is a stronghold for wood storks. These animals time their migration and the reproduction with water levels that allow them, with their specialized beaks and feeding processes, to be at an ideal level for them to actually capture food, particularly important when they are breeding and have fledglings. So again, this is one of those species which is just now beginning to come back from the brink of extinction, still faces many threats, and this type of mining would only exacerbate those. So go ahead and share those results. And that is it. So thank you. And back to you, Christian.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, so another species on the top right there, and one I mentioned earlier, is the eastern indigo snake. This is found in portions of the refuge itself, as well as along the trail ridge. Should mining occur over several decades, it would undoubtedly bisect a corridor that eastern indigos require. And it would also permanently destroy gopher tortoise habitat along the trail ridge. And eastern indigo require gopher tortoise burrows for shelter, actually. So it'd be a double hit to both gopher tortoises and eastern indigos. Down in the bottom left, there is a personal favorite species of mine. That's the Atlantic sturgeon. And of course, sturgeon do not reside within the Okefenokee, but they do reside in a very small relic population within the St. Mary's River. And as you guys will recall me mentioning, the St. Mary's River is fed by the Okefenokee. And Atlantic sturgeon used to be found in most of our river systems. They used to reach 18 feet long at times, but they're hypersensitive to changes in water quality. And there may only be a few dozen of these animals left in the St. Mary's River. And, unequivocally, we can say that titanium mining operations over the long haul would result an increased runoff and sedimentation to within the St. Mary's River, and that could push this species closer to the edge. And finally, bottom right is the Florida panther. Florida panther, for what it's worth, is a bit of a misnomer because its historical range used to be throughout the Southeast. And Florida panthers do not reside in the Okefenokee right now. I don't want to create any misconceptions. But in order for this species truly to recover, to move north and find additional habitat beyond South Florida, the Okefenokee and the greater Osceola National Forest region, which is connected to the Okefenokee, must be a core recovery area for this animal. It is also the #1 reintroduction site for the panther. There are no reintroduction efforts afoot, but again, it just affirms how critical this habitat and this refuge is to that species. And one day I truly hope that they make it there and recolonize this lost stronghold of their own. But with that said, this is about people too. It's about wildlife and people. And the Okefenokee is in some ways an economic engine in South Georgia. It supports over 750 local jobs. There are anywhere from 600 to 750,000 visits a year. And that just pumps out millions of dollars into the local economy. And I know, those numbers might be a little vague and esoteric for folks, but I think the next slide sort of crystallizes things in that out of nearly 600 wildlife refuges, the Okefenokee is in the top 10 in terms of economic output. And according to visitor surveys, were the water quality or quantity of the refuge impacted, this tourism could shrink by potentially half in the future. So the stakes are high for people and wildlife alike. But as I reflect upon this campaign, it's occurred to me that there are really two competing visions in play. On the one hand, you really have that which has been promised by the mining industry over the years to local economies and local communities. And that's really the boom and bust cycle of the mining industry. On the other is the fact that the Okefenokee has the potential and is gaining momentum to become the first World Heritage Site designation afforded to a refuge unit. Now, World Heritage designations are very few and far between. They're really reserved for only the best of the best. And in the United States, the places that have that honor already are the Redwoods, Great Smoky Mountains, Grand Canyon. And again, out of 568 national wildlife refuges, the Okefenokee could become the first to receive that important designation. It's a non-regulatory designation. It wouldn't really come with any restrictions of any sort, but it would undoubtedly catalyze tourism. It would build upon the economic growth in that area in a sustainable way, and an indefinite way as well. If, however, this mine proceeds, it's questionable whether the Okefenokee would still be deserving of this important designation. So that brings me to where we are today. If you've been following this issue, you'll know that we're in a now or never state for the Okefenokee. Recently, the Trump administration made some very significant rollbacks to the Federal Clean Water Act. And as a result of that, where there was once a federal process, where there was once a federal form of review and public comment required, none is required now. And as such, only the state of Georgia, namely the Georgia Environmental Protection Division, has a handful of permits that Twin Pines must acquire to begin mining operations on the doorstep of this refuge. So despite the fact that this is one of the country's most controversial projects by far, Twin Pines is unfortunately now closer than ever to commencing operations without any scientific justification for doing so. The only data at this point anywhere to suggest that mining would prove safe was a model that was commissioned by Twin Pines itself. So, the stakes, again, are high, and we're doing everything we can to ensure that the state of Georgia and Governor Kemp take action to reject this ill-conceived project. And, fortunately, the American public is on our side. As you can see from this map here, during the last 2 public comment periods, nearly 70,000 people commented on this project from all 50 states. So it's clear that the people care, and the conservation community cares as well. In the past year, over 40 groups have come together to form the Okefenokee Protection Alliance, which is the first coalition of its kind devoted singularly to the protection of this world-class resource. But, in order to protect it moving forward, we need the support of the public. So with that in mind, we have a slide with potential actions for you to take, and we hope you do so. A great way to get started would just be to go to protectokefenokee.org. You can learn all about the issues. You can sign a petition that is being sent to Georgia's governor, encouraging him to protect the swamp. But I also encourage you guys to do other things, write LTEs. We're happy to help with that sort of thing. Contact your elected officials, because again, I in the next 6 months, we're gonna know where things stand, and we hope that you will support us moving forward. So with that said, I think it would be time, with what little time we have now, to open it up for questions. And I saw one question in the chat. Twin Pines Minerals is based out of Birmingham, Alabama. The window to submit letters from Maria Fernandez is now for the next several months. So if you submit your petition to Governor Kemp, we know he's receiving them. We know he's taking stock of those. But again, now is the time to do so. So I would say the sooner the better. And there will very likely be a public comment period held by the state of Georgia. So if you go to the Okefenokee Protection Alliance's Facebook page or Defenders of Wildlife's regional page, we'll definitely keep you apprised of when that opens. And that'll be really important for people to engage in.
This is Troy Edel. I have a question. I oftentimes use the Okefenokee as an example when I'm sort of talking to people from other regions that are sharing similar challenges. You look at the landscape and the communities that surround Okefenokee, and this is a very economically depressed area in both South Georgia and North Florida, primarily whose economy is reliant upon extraction of timber resources in that region, and the timber markets are way down as well. So they're not getting anywhere near the economic benefit of timber that they once did. So in a way, I think that's a challenge to the conservation community to figure it out, because although Okefenokee gets a lot of visits, as the graphic showed, the tourism, despite many promises over decades, the tourism infrastructure there is not well developed. It's pretty poor. I mean, the facilities on the refuge itself are not in good condition. Certainly the communities could not support, say, a first-class tourism experience as they are right now. So that makes it real easy for someone like Twin Pines to come in and really kind of sell the shiny whistles that are that sound really good to the local communities. And that's why the local communities are supportive of the Twin Pines project. So I think my question is, as a conservation community, how can we do better to get the people that live within these most precious areas to become more supportive and become more invested in protecting these resources that are in their backyard?
Yeah, that's a great point. I agree. It is an economically depressed area, and I think the conservation community recognizes that we do need to provide an alternative good. The Okefenokee is valuable in itself. Everybody recognizes that, but it's for that reason that I just mentioned that, you know, we're encouraging the development of, you know, the World Heritage Site status and nomination. You know, that is the gold standard for tourism, even more so than national parks and that sort of thing. And it inevitably brings with it all sorts of positive development. And, you know, I think if it did get legs, it would provide an opportunity to provide different mechanisms, um, you know, more refined opportunities for visitor center experiences, whether in town or elsewhere, that could be a substitute economically for these types of, you know, exploitative proposals. But I mean, I agree, you know, it's not always a very simple calculus, but I can say unequivocally that, you know, OPA, this coalition, is doing everything in its power to not only stop this project from moving forward, but to, again, provide an alternative for these local communities. And I would argue that that is through World Heritage Site nomination.
Christian, another question that we got was sort of related to the shifting political landscape. So we do have 2 new senators in Georgia. We also have a new Secretary of Interior with with Deb Haaland. And just talk a little bit about some of those conversations we're having internally about how these shifting politics for our public lands may help us in this fight.
Yeah, so it's still early. Obviously, you know, things have changed. Ossoff and Warnock are still getting situated, of course. You know, we hope that they're going to weigh in on this project in one form or another. And at a minimum, you know, require or encourage the development of some sort of robust analysis where one was once required by the Army Corps. You know, that could be through some mechanism, through working with Georgia EPD, or something of that nature. But, you know, I think and hope that, you know, these incoming senators will appreciate the need to slow down at a minimum this project because of the fact that there's been no meaningful scientific review and because there are such significant economic consequences at stake. And, you know, if Twin Pines fails to scientifically prove their case, then to speak against this mine. You know, I think most people everywhere can agree that they want to see the swamp protected. You know, no one wants the mining to move forward if it's going to damage the integrity of this place. And again, right now, there's no evidence to suggest anywhere that mining is going to prove benign. So it's my hope that, you know, these new incoming political figures will weigh in and further that dialogue. But, you know, time will tell.
Yeah, and I'll just add before I close this out here. You know, I'm sure it was obviously a very busy news week last week, overwhelmed by the incident at the Capitol. But another very telling thing happened last week, which was the Trump administration rushed through the leasing in the Arctic. And I mention that because the public optics really do matter. If you look at those lease sales, you know, a couple things were set to happen. One, the sales of those leases in the Arctic were meant to offset the tax cuts that we've been suffering from economically for some time. And so that therefore they were banking on it to be a boon. But actually only 9 leases across that whole area were actually sold. The majority of them were picked up by the state of Alaska, who retains that authority and that right there in the state of Alaska. And when asked to the various companies who did not bid, you know, some of the global you know, fossil fuel industry heads, they said that it just, you know, not only was it a significant investment to do this in a risky area, but also the public optics did not support their willingness to go in there. So I say all that because we know the Arctic has been a several decades long campaign. I hope that we resolve the issues at Okefenokee much faster, but, you know, whereas Twin Pines seems to be, you know, completely naive to what the public optics look like, our pressure, our voices leveraged by political leaders who are amenable to our cause should help this campaign continue to grow legs and in a full-throated way protect the landscape. So with that, the final question, Christian, we just got from Penny Payne is how this will affect water quality, particularly for people. I know one of the concerns that we've had is how, because this is the headwaters of two major river systems, how those downstream water quality impacts will affect local communities. A big concern that we heard when we were organizing on Capitol Hill with politicians, a question they were asking as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you said it yourself, drinking water. The Okefenokee births these two rivers that people depend upon in South Georgia and in North Florida. Titanium mining operations could release a pretty nefarious form of mining sludge. And inevitably these things run off to somewhere, and it's either going to go into the swamp or the St. Mary's River or both. And that's ultimately going to cost people. That's going to cost local municipalities to deal with. So that's definitely a concern for sure.
Excellent. Well, Christian, thank you so much. And to all of you who joined us today, really appreciate it. I will, as you may recall, and this will be, so we're going to be sending out a follow-up email, which is going to include a recording of this presentation. And we invite you to reply that email with any further questions that you may have. We'll also be announcing a prize giveaway in that email, so please take a look at that. We look forward to seeing you on one of our future Lunch and Learns. I believe the next one that's coming up is going to be around some of our work in the marine environments, particularly our growing concern and call to action around plastic pollutions, particularly microplastics. They're called a sort of a fun term called nurdles, but you do not be fooled. These are insidious little pieces of plastic used in industry. And we hope to see you join us there. But with that, again, I want to thank the Defenders team for helping put this together and for all of you for joining us. And I hope you have a wonderful remainder of your week and have enjoyed spending your lunch hour with us, learning a little bit about these important landscapes and the best ways we can help protect them together. So thank you so much.